Today on You Break It, You Fix It, we are going to learn the art of filling a hole. Let's get to it. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to cover something that is a tremendous fundamental skill to building any cool vehicle, and that is welding a hole in sheet metal. Seems very simple, not so much. This is a skill that took me a while to master, and I fought it for a very long time, and I screwed up a lot of sheet metal. And mastering it has allowed me to build some really cool stuff. There are a million reasons why you need to weld a hole in sheet metal. Maybe you have a vehicle that has trim molding on it. You want to make the body of the vehicle look nice and sleek, so you want to weld all those holes up. Maybe you drilled a hole incorrectly. We've all done it, and you want to weld that hole up. And perhaps you are shaving components off a vehicle like we are doing on the C10 build. This is right smack dab in another video I'm filming where we are shaving a bunch of stuff off the body of this C10, and this had a mirror mounted on the upper frame of the driver door, and we need to weld these holes up. I wanted to take a second and just bust down these base fundamentals of what we're doing and why we're doing it. I'm going to get you locked up in the tripod, and we'll get some props, and we will get right to this. You can't see the holes here because of the glare, but there are two... Grab a stick. There are two, can you see that skewer? Yeah. Two holes someone drilled here to mount a mirror. Now, when you're restoring a vehicle or building a custom vehicle, you're going to count a million holes that people have just bondoed over. Back in the day, that was kind of an acceptable procedure. Today, we know a lot better. We have welders. We can weld the holes up. So I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between procedure and why we're doing what we're doing. We need to clean and prep the surface, obviously, so the welder can do its job very well. And there's still a bunch of Bondo and gunk in these holes. You can use a die grinder with a carbide burr on it. This one, I don't have one sharp enough to get in these holes. So what I'm using is a step bit mounted on a drill. And I'm not trying to drill the hole larger. We don't want to make a bigger hole that we have to weld, but we're just going to let the bit clean out the inside of the hole for us so we have a nice hole to work with. Get your mind out of the gutter. I got to choose my words a little better. And then we're going to take a grinder and just clean up the surface. We're also going to make sure the back side of the hole is very clean too. That way any weld that's going to go down inside doesn't get contaminated with garbage on the back. So imagine we just did that. We just cleaned this off. Now we need to weld this. Well, if you've ever welded sheet metal, you know it's very easy to get too hot and you'll actually blow the weld through the panel if you get it too warm. I am using a Millermatic 140, 110 welder. I urge you to use whatever welder you have at your disposal. And the first thing I'll mention is just having your welder set properly. I'm not going to go into depth in this video about that, but on nearly every single welder, when you open up the panel of a MIG welder, there's a chart on the inside that shows you exactly how to set your welder for the thickness of material you're working with. This is a roughly 18 gauge steel, so I've got my welder set up to weld that. Now that we have all those things dialed in, I want to grab a couple props to show you what we're going to be doing and why. So I've got this handy dandy roll of tape. Let's pretend that's our hole in the metal. I've got some of my kids' Play-Doh, and I have a shish kebab skewer. So what the hell does Play-Doh and a skewer have to do with this? Well, let's pretend this is our MIG wire, and we'll pretend this hunk of Play-Doh is a ball of metal on the end of our wire. You can't see the wire, it's too fine right now. So what we're trying to accomplish when we're welding up these holes in the metal is we're trying to put material back in this hole. Seems pretty simple. It can be very frustrating if you're used to welding thick material, or maybe you're just learning how to weld, to run your wire and pull the trigger and all of a sudden, bzz, and now what have you done? You've created a larger hole on this outside because this edge is too thin. So before we can actually burn a nice weld puddle into this hole, you see how thin our wire is, you see how big the hole is, we need to add material to the edge of this hole. Well, how the hell do we do that? What we need to do is we need to zap the trigger and we'll create a ball of molten metal on the end of this. And I'm doing this with props because I don't have fancy welding filming equipment, but this will get us there. Trying to see if I can have, oh, there we go. Have my, kind of look like a fool here, but you can see, just a second, let me use my little pointer here. So I hit the trigger quickly to make this little ball of metal on the end of my wire. The reason why we do this, let's pretend, as I said, that our skewer is the end of our welder. So now what we're trying to do once we have the ball on there is the next time we zap our trigger, we are trying to bzz, leave that ball on the edge of the hole that needs to weld up. And when you quick zap the trigger, it'll form a ball under the wire, and the next time it comes down, it'll hit again, and you can leave that ball of molten material on there. This all seems confusing, I know, but once you start doing it, these principles will line up. And we'll be doing this practically with the welder, and I'll go a little bit, and you'll be able to see what it looks like as you're welding it. So your goal is to keep moving around this hole and stacking these balls of molten metal around the hole. And what this is doing is this is adding material for the welder to burn into your puddle and eventually close this hole up. And so we are going to take our MIG wire and keep stacking these little chunks of metal all the way around this hole, almost like a sewing machine. Din, 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 around this outside edge of the hole until you have coated the whole edge of the hole with these little balls of molten metal. And then we can do our final close up, or if the hole's big enough, you might have to do stringers or multiple layers of these balls. And on our final weld, we can get everything nice and hot and make a puddle and close the puddle up. So enough of our little toys here. I can finally get my kids' Play-Doh back. I am going to get these holes cleaned up with the tools I mentioned, and we'll get a better look of what it looks like in real life. Or as the kids are saying these days, IRL. I'm going to get you repositioned so you can see a little bit better, and I'm going to get my welding garb on, and we will keep rocking. Okay, both holes are prepped and ready to go. What I'm going to do is do a little bit of welding and then pull you in closer to see what it looks like and what I'm doing. But first, I can't say enough, wear all your appropriate safety equipment, a vest and a respirator, a welding jacket, a cap, a good welding helmet. I want you to do this stuff for as long as you possibly can. And the only way to do that is to preserve your health so you can do this for a very long time. Welding puts off some horrible gases that you really don't want to breathe in, and especially when you're working on old stuff, you have no clue what people put on this surface that could be toxic to you. So it's really important to protect yourself and be safety minded. So safety lecture over, I'm going to throw my helmet on and we will get to welding. So pay attention closely while I'm welding. You can hear the cadence of when the arc strikes. It is not a continuous bead. It is, think of a sewing machine needle coming down and tapping and then pulling back and tapping and pulling back. So we are just trying to create we're just trying to add material to the edge of the sheet metal surface. Now, I specifically welded only one side of this. Hopefully it focuses. So you can see through all the nasty carbon buildup there that there is several little hunks. You know, so clean up with my finger. You can see there are several little piles of metal along the edge of this hole. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So I am going to complete this on the outside edge, and we'll take a closer look again. And again, listen to the cadence while I'm welding. We are just trying to touch the wire to the edge enough to make a little pile of goo on the edge of the hole, and then we are backing up and then doing the same and just stacking those around the outside edge of the hole. Oh, I hate taking all my gear off. Okay, take a close look at this. All right, we have a bead of weld all the way around the outside edge of this hole. So we have a ton of material there now that will be able to melt into that hole. We'll get good penetration down into that opening. That way when we grind, we're not creating thin metal, we are just making flat metal. So now what we're gonna do, need my weldy stick. So now what we're gonna do is pretend this is my MIG wire. We are gonna treat this like a butt weld now. We're gonna strike an arc and start a puddle, and we are going to feed wire into this opening and allow the heat to pull this material into the hole and fill it up. We are going to start at one point in the circle and go all the way around and meet back here. And if you need to, you can do a quick inside loop and close this entire hole up and then back off. If you've welded a lot, you know the color through your welding helmet where the metal gets so hot that it's about to burn through. It gets to a very light yellow straw color, and that's what you're trying to avoid doing on sheet metal, which it's very easy to do. Welding sheet metal with a MIG welder is a lot of heat control and a lot of trigger control. You control the trigger. You always have the option to back out of whatever you're doing and just back away from it and let it cool. And especially on some of these holes, this is relatively thick metal, but if you're working on a newer car, it's some very thin stuff. But I'll give you a little trick if you're working on some more finicky sheet metal that might be thinner, or maybe the hole's a little bit larger, or maybe it's in the middle of a big open panel where you don't want to push a lot of heat to it. You can simply run your wire out a little bit longer. Yes, every welding instructor would tell you not to do this because you're not going to get the gas coverage, but once you know the rules, you know how to break them. And this is one of them. I don't want to squeeze the trigger because I'm going to blind myself, but by running your wire out a little bit farther, it actually decreases the voltage that's running through that wire. So it actually makes a colder weld, much like adjusting the heat or voltage dial on your welder, but you can do it in real time just by backing the gun up a little bit and running a little bit more wire out, and that'll actually create less heat in the sheet metal. Less heat means less penetration, so just watch the weld while you're welding. If it seems like it's not sucking down into the panel, then you got to go a little bit closer. We've explained a lot of principles and thinking behind this. I'm going to get you locked off, and I'll burn this weld back in, and I have one more thing I want to touch on. Okay, there we go. We have a finished weld over there. You can see the hole is completely gone. I'm going to grab the welder. Whew. I am going to grab the grinder and we'll knock this down, and I'll show you exactly what this thing's going to look like as a finished product. Okay, we got it all knocked down with the grinder. You can see no more hole. It used to look like this. Now it looks like this. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve. And I can't say enough. You can't just watch a video and expect that you're going to master this instantly. It takes time and practice and patience. So if you screw up, don't get frustrated. You now have another tool in your toolbox. If you burn a hole through metal, now you know how to weld that hole up. That's why this is such a crucial skill, because once you start diving into welding sheet metal, you are going to create a few holes here and there, and this will help you out. The very last thing I want to talk about, and I talk about it anytime I'm welding sheet metal in any of my videos because it is super overlooked and no one ever talks about it, and that is grinding. Sounds super boring. My least favorite thing to do in the world is grinding metal, but welding sheet metal is only half the battle. You need to know how to grind sheet metal. So let's say I'm going to use my door chalkboard. As you can see, I've used it for other explanations. So let's say these are two pieces of metal that need to be joined. Here's the gap where we're going to weld. Here is our weld, this hump. So when we grind, what we want to focus on is knocking the top of the weld off. You can see this would be our grinding disc. We want to grind here all the way down to the surface. Well, what can happen, and especially in funky areas of grinding, is you can pitch your grinding disc, and then you're hitting the surface of the sheet metal. And a grinder doesn't care what it's grinding. It'll burn right through the surface of the sheet metal, or even worse, it'll make thin sheet metal that you don't realize is compromised, and that's not good for safety if it's in a structural area, and it's not good for aesthetics. If you go through and do a ton of body work and paint and prime this thing, and eventually that weak point in the metal will show up once the body starts flexing, and you will be really mad at yourself. So my biggest takeaway with grinding welds on sheet metal is just focus your mind on taking the top of the weld off until it becomes flat with the two surfaces that you join together, and you will have a much better finished product. Didn't sound good. This is where I want to leave you in this video. I didn't want to make this super long, but this is a very crucial fundamental skill to building and repairing vehicles and just generally making cool stuff. There's going to come a place in time where you are going to have a hole in sheet metal and you don't want it to be there, and this will help you out. And another thing I want to mention is this sheet metal is pretty thick. I worked through it quickly. I welded it quickly, but if I were welding a molding hole in the middle of a big open door panel like this, I would have gone much slower. I would probably do a couple tacks and walk away, let it cool, do a couple more tacks, and then even welding the hole completely up, I might do that in a few different stages to really keep the heat down. You don't want to pour a bunch of heat into the middle of a big open panel like this. Otherwise, it'll cave the center of that panel in, and we do not want that. So as always, I'm Jim Murphy. The channel is You Break It, Fix It. Thank you so much for watching. You could be spending your time doing many other foolish things. Instead, you're here learning skills that could make you money, make you cool, or make you more self-reliant, which is awesome. Please like the video, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss anything on the C10 build. We have a ton of videos coming up on that. And please hit me up down in the comments below, especially if you have value to add to this. I cannot believe how cool this community has been by helping each other out and answering questions that I can't get to or that I just simply don't know the answer to. And it's really cool to see strangers helping other strangers out. I'm going to exit right on that high note, and I'll see you in another video.